Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, I've got an action-adventure series of movies which very few people know about. They're weirdly absent from the popular discourse about action-adventure movies in the 21st century. And the intellectual property on which they're based has a long history going back to the 1970s. But before I talk about that, got a present from M. Love in Scotland, a subscriber to the channel. There is the cat, Kaji, who is beautiful. In fact, if I hold it that way, it's probably a lot cuter. And I also got a birthday present, which surprised and really delighted me. The Arrow video in Steelbook of Gamera, the Heisei trilogy. There's the back if you want to take a look at it. Tons of extras. All I can say is thank you. I get a bit funny when I get something nice happen to me. So if I'm acting a little off, I'm sorry about that. But I feel deeply thankful that people like me enough to send things across the planet when it's my birthday or at other times too. So thank you very much for that. I will be watching and reviewing the Gamera trilogy. My sources tell me that it's pretty fun and I'm going to enjoy it a lot. So look forward to me reviewing that one in a future video. Back to what I'm talking about in this one. English language cinema is a weird thing. Overwhelmingly, it's dominated by America, an American product and American intellectual properties adapted into cinema. But there's a lot more out there, and there's a lot more out there that is well known to people who don't speak English, particularly in Europe. This one's based on a Belgian intellectual property. It originally started out as a series of novels in the 1970s written by a guy called Jean Van Ham, who knew a lot about economics. Now, I know that's a dry subject, not necessarily the subject that you immediately think of when you think action-adventure films. But he created a character and a series called Largo Winch. The novels weren't enormously successful. They were kind of sort of, but they weren't enormously successful. And then in the 1990s, something happened. An artist called Philip Frank collaborated with Van Ham to create a graphic novel series based on this character of Largo Winch. I probably should give you some backstory on the character. Largo Winch is the adopted son of billionaire Nerio Winch, who runs the W Corporation. And Largo as a child was secretly adopted by Nerio from a Yugoslav orphanage and raised by some friends of his. Very few people know he exists. So Largo grows up, he travels the world, he gains a whole bunch of interesting skills, and then his father's murdered. And Largo is the heir to this vast fortune, this enormous company, which has hundreds of thousands of employees. It runs some very shady businesses at times. And he's not only got to find out who killed his father. It's deemed suicide, but it's pretty obvious to everyone that it isn't. And he's also got to prove that he is the heir to the Winch fortune. The graphic novels are set up in an interesting way. They were done in 2 volumes. The first volume was a setup where Largo gets into enormous trouble and gets into an insurmountable problem. And then there's a cliffhanger, and then the second one comes out showing how he gets out of the trouble. The Largo Winch graphic novels are great. I've read a few of them. The artwork's fantastic. The sense of location around the world, and it's a globe-trotting series, is really good. You get things like the Golden Horn in Istanbul and all sorts of interesting little towns and villages and large cities. It's broad in scope, and in the middle of it you've got this rough and tumble heir to an enormous fortune who doesn't really care about the money. Became enormously popular, and from 1990 onwards there have been graphic novels regularly. The last one came out in 2023. So Largo Winch is big business. Originally it started out as a Belgian property, but it's being translated into about 15 languages. Then in 2001 to 2003 there was an English language television series based on the character. Knew nothing about it. It has been released on DVD in France, but I heard nothing about this. I don't know if it's shown in Australia ever. I know nothing at all about it except for this. Nerio Winch in the TV series was played by David Carradine, which is a bit of a mind-blowing thing in itself. The series was popular for a couple of years and then it faded out. Largo Winch had a fan base. Largo Winch was popular in the graphic novels. They were released, some of them in English, but most of them in other European languages. And then, in 2008, we got a Largo Winch movie. The movie's called The Heir Apparent in English, but it's called Largo Winch in most other languages. And it stars Thomas Sisley as Largo Winch. All three of the movies, they get in a name English language actor or actress to be in the movie. In this first one, it's Kristen Scott Thomas, who is now appearing in Slow Horses and doing great work as the head of MI5 in Slow Horses. She plays one of the assistants to Largo Winch as he dies and as the ownership of the Winch Corporation is put into doubt. And she's very good. She plays the kind of upper class corporate lady fantastically. Thomas Sisley playing Largo Winch. And Sisley's an interesting actor. He mostly works in French and he does his own stunts. He does the Tom Cruise thing of doing his own stunts. And he's got an edge on Tom Cruise in some interesting ways. For a start, he has chest hair. In one of the Mission Impossible movies, you do get to see Tom Cruise with his shirt off, and his torso looks like a steamed chicken breast. Thomas Sisley, to his credit, has a bit of chest hair happening. We get the history of Largo Winch. We get to see him adopted by Nero in the orphanage. We get a little bit of a backstory on him. We learn that he was raised on the Dalmatian coast of Croatia by some close friends of Nero. He grows up, he goes to a private school. He then, when he's an adult, decides he's going to travel the world. And we first see him as an adult on the Amazon River in a remote village, getting a tattoo from a man who says his tattoos can offer invulnerability. Largo gets the tattoo. It isn't quite finished when he hears a ruckus outside and there's a woman being hassled by a local militia. So Largo attacks them and ends up in prison. He gets bailed out by Freddie, who was Nero's right-hand man, and then goes to the Winch Group headquarters in Hong Kong, where he has to do all the corporate stuff, which isn't as interesting as all of the action sequences. Now, it's interesting they made this film because they didn't have the approval of the Hong Kong government to make the film, so they did it on the sly. They guerrilla film made it. And part of that is by setting a lot of the Hong Kong scenes on a boat in the Hong Kong harbour, which I kind of like. I like the little cheekiness when it comes to filmmaking. We get to meet some other characters who are part of the backstory and the graphic novels of Largo Winch. We get Gaultier, who is his butler. He's a lot of fun in this one as well. We get a mysterious woman called Naomi, who appears to be some kind of mercenary, mostly to do with intelligence stuff and corporate espionage. And she's played by Melanie Thierry, and she is great. She does a really nice job of giving us an ambiguous character there. And another actor turns up as one of the executives of the Winch Corporation. Wasn't famous then, but he's a lot more famous now. It's Benedict Wong playing a guy called William Kwan. He turns up there and does a nice job of it as well. And this is a solid action film. It came out around the same time as all of the Bourne movies with the shaky camera things. But I think that the action sequences in this movie are a lot crisper and a lot more interesting than many of the action sequences you get in the Bourne films, even though the dynamic camera work in the Bourne films is pretty good. In this one, you get things like Largo is shot by a man in a helicopter and falls off a cliff. And Thomas Sisley did his own stunt on that. And the fact that the actor is actually doing quite a dangerous stunt falling off a cliff in Dalmatia works really well for it. And it's something that continues in the second movie and possibly the third. The third movie doesn't come out until August 2024. And the plot moves along fast. The action sequences are great. And it's got that thing that French cinema does really well, which is the car stunts are really nicely done. France has been doing that since the 1960s. Car stunts in French action films are chef's kiss wonderful. And this one's no exception. They wreck a lot of really nice cars that I wouldn't mind owning. Eventually there's some malfeasance by corporate people. There's some very, very shifted characters. There are mercenaries everywhere. There's bullets flying. There's cars getting crashed. There's explosions. There's a fight on the roof of a skyscraper in Hong Kong, which has a kind of visceral grittiness to it, which I really appreciated. Things get resolved, and ultimately Largo is in charge of the Winch Corporation, which is no real surprise to anybody who knows this kind of movie. But I liked it. It's a good, solid action film. Has a different viewpoint than, say, an American or an English action film would. based on a rock-solid intellectual property with a ton of backstory which can be drawn on for the plots. And I really enjoyed it. Then we got to 2011, and the sequel came out, Largo Winch II, also known as The Burma Conspiracy. Like the first one, it was directed by Jérôme Salé, and again it stars Thomas Sisley, and the English language star they get for this one is Sharon Stone. And Sharon Stone plays a human rights investigator, a commissioner for the United Nations, and she gives us quite a nuanced character for this kind of film. The story starts 3 years before most of the action, just before Nerio Winch is killed. Nerio finds out that Largo is living in a village in Burma. Things are not going good where Largo is. He helps a bunch of people who are the victims of a massacre which wipes out an entire village, and he's helping set up like a field hospital for these people. He meets a Frenchman there called Simon, who gets beaten up by the people who are opposed to the military junta in Burma, and he rescues Simon and gets banished from the village for that. He leaves the village, and he leaves his girlfriend Melanie, who tells him to go. She can't go with him. She is of her people, and she must stay there. So Largo leaves, and then it cuts to the present day, and Largo gets accused by the United Nations of being the person responsible for that massacre in Burma. Meanwhile, he's got a deal going where he's going to sell all of his shares to the Winch Corporation and use the money to set up a humanitarian foundation. He's seen what happened in Burma. He's seen what happened in various places around the world. And he doesn't want the money. He wants to set up a humanitarian foundation with the $28 billion he has in order to help people, rather than just keeping the wealth to himself. So he cuts up a very complex business deal where in 28 days a buyer must be found for the shares, and he gets the money for those shares and sets up the corporation. Meanwhile, he gets into this trouble with the United Nations, who have proof from various people and a witness saying that he was responsible for the massacre in Burma 3 years before. And as the investigation starts, he finds out that the witness is actually Melanie, his ex-girlfriend, and he doesn't know why she is testifying that he was responsible for this massacre. Largo gets jailed and escapes. Meanwhile, his butler Gautier is tracking down Simon, the guy he knew 3 years ago, who can prove that Largo was not part of the massacre. And so Gautier goes on his own journey through the back roads of Thailand to find Simon, who is running basically a pirate DVD business in Bangkok. And that's a nice piece of kind of lighter stuff amongst all of the heaviness. Again, you've got that global viewpoint, you've got international travel, you've got some beautiful locations shot wonderfully, you've got tight, tense action scenes, you've got Sharon Stone playing a UN official, and you got a backstory and an elaboration of Largo Winch's life, which continues it forward into the third movie. It's good. The action scenes are great. There's a corrupt general in Burma who is really nasty and incredibly dangerous as well. And the action scenes level up. They compare favorably with some of the stuff you see in Mission Impossible films. There's a scene where Largo, Simon, and a bad guy fall out of an executive plane. And Thomas Sisley did the stunts in free fall, and there's a free fall fight between Largo Winch and the bad guy, where the actor and the stunt guy actually have a fight. I've never seen anything like this. Right from the start, the other guy starts shooting at him while in free fall, doing it in free fall. It's not the back projected in a studio. Everything you see on the screen is done while these guys are parachuting out of an aeroplane and falling towards the ground. Meanwhile, Simon doesn't have a parachute, and Largo has to catch him before he falls to his death. And even though it's not a particularly long sequence in the movie, this is next level stunt work. This is, you're crazy, why are you doing this kind of stunt work for the lead actor in a movie to do? And yet he does it. It's not Tom Cruise jumping off a cliff on a motorbike, it's something even crazier than that. And I like the idea of somebody diving out of a plane after somebody and shooting at them with a gun while they're both in free fall. There's something about that really hits my sweet spot as far as action cinema is concerned. Everything gets explained in the end, and there's some really tight fights, one of them in an apartment, which is incredibly gritty. It's got a real toughness about it. The fighting in tight confines works really well. There's a twist in the plot involving that fight that's quite important to the future of the franchise and the intellectual property. The fight scenes are just gritty, close in toughness, and they're not shot with 85 cuts all through. There are a couple of long shots in the fights, but where there are quick cuts in the fights, they're well chosen, and they do have a continuity which lets you understand every moment what's happening, who's doing it, how the other person's reacting. And I like that. They're really well edited and well shot, and they work really well as individual fights. It's an honest action film. Lots of locations, interesting protagonists, twists and turns, beautiful women, beautiful locations, quirky characters around the main protagonist, and it's not an English language film. Now, the third movie, as I said, is coming out in August 2024, and it's called in English The Price of Money, a Largo Winch adventure, which I'm not going to tell you the plot of because it does involve some spoilers for the earlier films. But the main villain is being played by an American actor who is one of the people who has been Me Too'd. And if you haven't heard about him in the last few years, there's quite a good number of reasons why. It's actually James Franco playing the villain in this one, which may well mean that you're not going to watch the movie. It's got a new director, Olivier Masset-Depasse, and from the short trailer I've seen, the stunt work and all of the stuff that made the first two movies interesting is there in the third one as well. So I wouldn't mind finding a copy of that. Seeing the Largo Winch movies is a little bit difficult. There are some Blu-rays out there, but they don't tend to have English language subtitles, which is a shame. Maybe Umbrella or Imprint need to put the first two movies out in a box set or something like that, because I think they'd really deliver well to an audience. I fell down the rabbit hole of the Largo Winch films, and I like them. I like what they do. I like the international locations. I like the fact that the locations are really well chosen too. It's just not generic Hong Kong or generic Croatia or generic Paris or generic New York or wherever. They're really well chosen for how can they contribute to the action sequences and how can they contribute to our sense of what this place is and what Largo is doing there. There's a real tightness to the choices of locations that I really appreciate. There's some product placement, particularly cars. There's a lot of Audis particularly that get smashed to pieces in these movies, but that's par for the course for any kind of action adventure film. You're going to have some product placement in it sooner or later. But I like these, and I think you should check them out. They've got an interesting protagonist. You can go back and read the graphic novels, and even though Tomo Sisley doesn't look like Largo Winch in the graphic novels are fun to read, and there are English language versions of them around. So, recommendation from me. Just another one of those weird, quirky little movie series that people don't talk about in English language cinema discussions. And I think that's a shame because there is a sameness to action cinema in English language markets at the moment, and seeing something from somewhere else that does things somewhat differently is refreshing. And I'm a big fan of action cinema, as you know. And you should check out the Largo Winch films if you can find copies of them, or you can find them on a streaming service somewhere. You may well need to use a VPN to do that, and you may well need to brush up your language skills a little bit. I was lucky enough to find online versions that were subtitled, and if they ever appear in a decent Blu-ray edition, I'm going to pony up my money for them. So that's it for this time around. Something different, something odd. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Check out some of the other movies I've covered. Check out the playlist in particular. There's a lot of good stuff there. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies and also by becoming a channel member. Next up, I've got Science Fiction Saturday. I'm going to be filming that in the movie room out in the back of the house because middle-aged geek girl and I have finally got it into a fit shape for filming, even though the man cave here is never that. And I'm looking forward to be able to talk about movies in an environment with movies all around the walls. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch some foreign language action films. You're going to have a good time with them, and you're going to learn things, and you're going to see things you won't see in English language action films. And I'll catch you next time.